re-election for the presidency. President Bush has, in fact, been re-elected to a 4-year term.
Barack Obama will be re-elected president. Hello, good evening, and welcome to Planet America's Election Night Special. I'm John Barron.
And I'm Chaz Licciardello.
Well, it was probably inevitable, Chaz. Of course, the 2020 election was going to end in uncertainty, anxiety, and no clear end in sight. Trump says he's won. Biden says he will win.
And both sides are accusing the other side of trying to steal it.
Tonight, we'll tell you what we know, what we don't know, and what might happen next.
And like all pundits, we're probably going to get all of it wrong, but that won't stop us. Never stopped us before.
America will soon be waking up, but for many it will seem like a nightmare after all the campaigning, all of the polls, all of the predictions of the last 4 years. We have, at least for now, the makings of a constitutional crisis that could go all the way to the United States Supreme Court. Democratic presidential candidate Joe Biden is ahead in the popular vote and ahead as well in the states that have been called in the Electoral College. But with a handful of states either too close to call or too early in their count because of mail-in ballots, President Trump has taken the truly extraordinary step of claiming victory and alleging fraud without providing evidence. He says there is an attempt to steal this election from him. Here's what he said just before 2:30 a.m. at the White House.
This is a fraud on the American public. This is an embarrassment to our country. We were getting ready to win this election. Frankly, we did win this election. So our goal now is to ensure the integrity for the good of this nation. This is a very big moment. This is a major fraud in our nation. We want the law to be used in a proper manner. So we'll be going to the U.S. Supreme Court. We want all voting to stop. We don't want them to find any ballots at 4 o'clock in the morning and add them to the list, okay?
The president had signalled those intentions a couple of hours earlier with this tweet. He said, "We are up big, but they are trying to steal the election. We will never let them do it. Votes cannot be cast after the polls are closed." That tweet was then blocked by Twitter because they said it might be misleading. And that, while not surprising, because of course reports last week suggested that's exactly what he was going to do, is still without precedent for any American president. Meanwhile, former Vice President Joe Biden got the jump earlier in the evening, not exactly claiming victory, but in claiming confidence that he will be declared the winner in the days ahead.
I'm here to tell you tonight, we believe we're on track to win this election. We knew because of the unprecedented early vote and the mail-in vote that it was going to take a while. We're going to have to be patient until the hard work of tallying the votes is finished. And it ain't over till every vote is counted, every ballot is counted. It's not my place or Donald Trump's place to declare who's won this election. That's the decision of the American people. But I'm optimistic about this outcome.
Well, as for which candidate has the best chance of being president when this is all over, as we'll see, that very much depends, Chaz, on who we ask the question to.
Yeah.
But first, let's see how the actual vote count is progressing. Joining us now from ABC Election Central, Anthony Green. Anthony, thanks for being with us.
Good evening.
Oh, by the way, Anthony, just before we go on, I want to apologise on air for breaking your screen earlier this morning.
Yeah, I know you're not used to using a live screen.
Yeah.
Can we have a look at that?
Chaz wants to look at this.
Chaz,
Thank you. Now, that's wonderful what Anthony just said, but I just want to make just a very brief point, and that is that this guy there is ahead by 8 points, okay? There's an 8-point margin in the polls.
Touched me too much.
Thank you. There's an 8-point margin in Michigan as well.
You should learn live television.
Damn it.
No, it's not going to do it.
There we go. Okay.
You've heard of a butt dial. That was literally a butt selecting of California for Trump.
I didn't realise it was so hard. I really admire you, Anthony.
A whole new respect for you, Anthony. But what can you tell us about this crazy day we've seen unfold and what might happen next?
Okay, look, this is the numbers, the definitive numbers as they stand. 238 for Biden, 213 for Donald Trump. Now, let's give away a couple of smaller states to get back to the real numbers. We'll give Alaska to the Republicans, we'll give Nevada to the Democrats, and we'll give the second seat in Maine to the Republicans, which Donald Trump won it last time. That makes it 244 to 217. From there, let's look at Donald Trump's path to power. He wins Georgia, say, which is still disputed. So say he wins Georgia, 233. Add North Carolina, he's at 248. And say he wins Pennsylvania, 268. He's not at 270. If Joe Biden wins Wisconsin and Michigan, it's a long day, he wins 270 to 268. So at the moment, with those numbers, because of the loss of Arizona, Donald Trump needs Georgia, North Carolina, I nearly said North Korea, North Carolina, Pennsylvania.
I think he's got their
one
vote.
of the other states. Yeah. So that's what the position is at the moment. So let's, if that turns, if the Democrats do win Pennsylvania, it becomes a little clearer and a better result for Joe Biden. Say Donald Trump wins. Let me give this red. Say he wins that, and the Democrats win Georgia. Then Joe Biden wins 286 to 252. So at the moment, I think in the end, Georgia, sure, if the Democrats win Georgia, that's an extra seat for them. It's good for them. Then Pennsylvania's out of play. But even with Pennsylvania in play, at the moment, Donald Trump needs Georgia, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, and either Michigan or Wisconsin to win, unless for some reason he wins Nevada. Or Arizona's wrong or something like that. But, that's almost a deadlock. I just said to someone earlier that after all of this, it reminds me of the 2017 British election when, having voted to leave the EU, Britain then went and elected a minority government which had no capacity to do anything about it. You just get the feeling if Joe Biden wins, he's not going to control the Senate. I have no idea where the politics plays out from here. Do the Republicans, dig down and join in with Trumpism again, or do they decide to try and destroy Trumpism because Biden can't be an effective president without control of the Senate and with such a small mandate? I have no idea where it goes from here, but
these are some of the questions we're going to explore on the program tonight. Anthony, thank you so much for staying up after a long day. We really appreciate that.
Thanks a lot.
Anthony Green at ABC US Election Headquarters. Now, let's hear from Celinda Lake, veteran Democratic pollster and political strategist and an advisor this year to Vice President Joe Biden. She joined us a little earlier from Washington, D.C. I guess the big news so far on this Election Day 2020 is the surprising strength of Donald Trump in Florida, but then Joe Biden flipping the state of Arizona. Do you think that will be decisive, or is that a bit too early to call?
I think it'll be decisive because I think that we will do very well in the upper Midwest, in Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. So I think that will end up having been compensatory and decisive.
Celinda, is your confidence in the upper Midwest based on the results that you've seen so far today, or just based on your feelings before today?
The major reason for my confidence in the upper Midwest is the number of early votes that were banked. And I think your viewers need to be cautious of early returns from those states. And remember that those are states that count their election day ballots before they count their early vote. And the Democrats and the Republicans had very different strategies. Donald Trump encouraged his voters to vote on election day. The Democrats and Joe Biden encouraged their voters to vote early and vote by mail. And in Pennsylvania, for example, there are 1 million ballots that have not been counted and won't start being counted until tomorrow. You can tell the Republicans feel threatened by that because they've already filed an injunction to keep those ballots from being counted.
Celinda, has today's election unfolded pretty much as you would have expected, or have there been some surprises, some things that maybe you didn't see coming?
I don't know that we didn't see them coming. there have been some struggles and some opportunities. The really high turnout in the African American community has been a real positive. The strength of Joe Biden with women in the suburbs, a real positive. And there's a big gender gap in this election. The softness with some of the Latino community, not a surprise, but obviously something we worked hard to overcome. And one needs to understand that the Latino community is not monolith. So it's not a single vote. And often the news reports count it that way.
People have spoken a bit about the 14-point swing against the Democrats in Cuban-heavy regions in Florida as one of the reasons why there was that big move against the Democrats in Florida. But if you look at the AP Votecast at the demographics, all of them are relatively weak for Biden. All of them. Why do you think that is? What is it about Florida?
Florida is just a state that is so diverse. It's so big. It has a Republican governor. They ran very, very aggressive media and social media around a variety of issues targeting the Latino community. First of all, Cuban Americans have been Republican for a long time. The younger generation is moving more Democratic, but it's glacially slow. And then you have a lot of Central American Latinos who were very heavily targeted around the so-called socialism attack, which carries some salience in that community. The polls, the private polling always showed it very close in Florida. And those results, they're obviously disappointing, but there are other votes that are very encouraging.
So, Celinda, what is your expectation for the next 24 hours or so in terms of those Rust Belt states declaring numbers? Is there any timeline you're anticipating, or do we just wait and see when they count them and they announce them?
So I think it'll be a couple of days, honestly, and you're going to have a process of counting a record number of early votes, and you're also going to have a legal process where the Republicans are trying to stop that count. And the Democrats feel very, very strongly that every vote should be counted and every vote should be counted equally. But the Republicans have already taken the Democrats to court over the million vote by mail ballots and early ballots in Pennsylvania. And there'll be similar processes, I would expect, certainly in Michigan.
Celinda, let me paint a hypothetical, just a random hypothetical that has nothing to do with today at all. Let's say you're a random hypothetical political strategist and I offered you the choice of Republicans holding the presidency for another term or for Democrats to inherit the presidency during an economic downturn with Republicans holding the Senate. What would you prefer?
Well, I would tell you that was really a deal with the devil. And I hope we don't have. But I think most Democrats, and I will say this for myself, one of the reasons that I work for Joe Biden is I agree totally with his assessment. And what Joe Biden said early on in this campaign is that 4 years of Donald Trump was an abomination. 8 years would totally change the character of this country. And I don't think we can afford 4 more years of Donald Trump.
Well, Celinda Lake, I know it's been a very busy day and we so appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Chaz, we've got breaking news. Actual news is breaking during Planet America Live on election night. What can you tell us?
Even as we speak, I am following Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and Michigan. They are bringing in more details right now.
Yeah, and we're talking about 5 in the morning and 4 in the morning in some of these Rust Belt states now, and they're still counting these mail-in ballots.
Yeah, and I'm going to keep on checking all through the show, even though I've barely started preparing what's coming up in the next hour. Live TV.
What do they say, Chaz?
Okay, well, Wisconsin, you might recall, only about an hour ago, there was 83% counted, and there was a 3.6 point margin, 3.6% margin where Joe Biden was behind Donald Trump. Mm-hmm. They've now upped that 6% counted to 89% counted, and now Biden is up by 0.3%. So he's now in the lead.
Biden is leading in Wisconsin.
That's right. Pennsylvania, no new data yet. There's still 74% counted with a 12.7% margin to Donald Trump. Okay, so that's a pretty big margin. Michigan, there was a 7.5% margin when 72% was counted. Now 78% is counted, and there's a 4.9% margin. So there's some movement going on in Michigan as well. But I will just keep on updating you as it happens. But I spoke on Wednesday about how if Biden won one out of North Carolina, Arizona and Florida, then it would make Trump's job very hard to win because he'd need to win a state that he was polling 8 points behind in. Well, Biden, it seems, won Arizona. But now everyone's freaking out that Trump could actually pull it off, that 8-point margin in a place like Michigan. Now, we don't know if that's the case. As I said, these numbers are changing fast. Maybe Biden might win Wisconsin and Michigan easily when the mail-in votes are added in. But let's say Trump can do it. The equation is now simple. There'll be no 269 tie. There are 4 contentious states, these 4. Georgia, Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania. The equation is this. Trump needs to win 3 of those states you see on the screen. Biden needs to win 2. Any 2. That's it. That's it for both of them. That's the simple equation for the presidency. So, when do we find out those counts? First, Georgia officials say they will finish up counting around 4 a.m. That's our time. Right now, there's a 2.2% margin there, which was an 8% margin not too long ago, and there is 8% left to count. Trump's claimed that state, but the New York Times Needle, which has been projecting based on results to date, quite accurately actually today, has projected Biden on current votes is actually winning that by 0.4%. And there are urban counties to come. So that is a real squeaker, regardless of what anyone says, including the president. But then, if Trump does win Georgia, we then turn to the other 3 states. Near complete unofficial results from Wisconsin are expected early tomorrow morning American time, right now for us. Michigan say that their count will be done overnight. Pennsylvania say their count will not be known until Friday. But importantly with Pennsylvania, you know it's got a 12-point margin. Also, with Pennsylvania, 7 counties that were won by Trump in 2016 won't even start counting mail-in votes till today or tonight. So that might be a problem for Democrats in Pennsylvania. That is only if they actually count all the votes, of course, because Trump wants to stop the count now. We saw that in the grab that John played before. Now, I need to emphasise to you guys that a late count is super normal. That's what happened in 2000, it's what happened in 2004. It happens all the time. In fact, in 2016, there were 12 different states that counted more than 10% of their total vote after the first night. So this is totally normal. There is nothing corrupt about this. This is the reason that states have until 14th of December to do their counting. It's supposed to take a while. I should also say, by the way, the reason why those 3 states are lagging is not because they're fraudulent or because they're real slow. It's actually something we talked about 6 weeks ago. This was so predictable. When you process a mail-in vote, a lot needs to be done. You need to check the signature according to the file. Sometimes you argue about that. There's people looking over your shoulder, scrutineers and all the rest of it. You have to check, sometimes there's social security number, sometimes there's barcodes. You need to sort them into places, into the right precinct, because in America, they count in precincts. This can take days. Normally, what states do is they spend 2 or 3 weeks doing this, especially when 60% of the state is voting early. Florida took 3 weeks. North Carolina, everyone's saying North Carolina, took 2 weeks. But those 3 states, Michigan, Wisconsin and Pennsylvania, they didn't take any time at all. Pennsylvania and Wisconsin couldn't touch the ballots until today. Michigan started yesterday, which is not good enough. Why? The reason why is because people were trying to get those dates pushed back to accommodate the bigger mail-in vote. When I say people, I mean Democratic governors and Democratic legislatures, but the Republicans in the legislature, who have a majority in those 3 states, blocked the change. Now, I said this was going to happen 6 weeks ago. It's very cynical to stop the ballots being able to be counted until it's late, and then to complain and suggest it's fraudulent because they're being counted late. But that is exactly what's happening now It is a trick, and I think we should all be awake to that.
Which again raises the issue of the United States Postal Service's ability to get these ballots to the electoral authorities in time for them to be counted. It also means, of course, that that we're going to be seeing a bunch of litigation to scrutinise some of these ballots. So in many ways, this is Florida 2000, potentially in Pennsylvania, Michigan and Wisconsin. The only difference being President Trump hasn't waited to even see if this is close. And we're seeing from these mail-in ballots that are coming in just the last half hour that actually Joe Biden's argument that, don't worry, we've got this in the bank, as Celinda Lake was saying, there may be some credence for that, but maybe not in Pennsylvania. We don't know.
We just don't know. We don't know. But I'll just add one more thing about, and that is that in a partisan place like America, which is, let's face it, a little bit sick and broken with partisanship, you get some awful results as a result of this kind of thing, where this is a YouGov poll from a couple of weeks ago. 71 to 29%, so 71% say it is more important to count all the votes than to determine the outcome quickly. That makes sense, doesn't it? Okay. 29% said no. But 57% of Trump supporters said it is more important to determine the outcome quickly, even if many mail-in ballot votes aren't counted. Now, that is partisanship run amok, and that is what we're going to be dealing with over the next few weeks. Yeah,
it's a pretty transparent play, but it may still work. Joining us now, though, is Lanhee Chen. He was a top advisor to Republican presidential candidate Mitt Romney in 2012 and Senator Marco Rubio in 2016. Lanhee was also appointed to the non-partisan Social Security Advisory Board by President Obama. Lanhee, welcome to the program. Lanhee Chen, welcome back to Planet America. What just happened?
Well, in some ways, this is kind of the worst case scenario where we don't have a firm resolution on the states we knew we were going to be watching all along: Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, to name just a few. And, you know, people were hoping on both sides for some kind of definitive answer that Biden would win in a landslide or Trump would have enough of a lead here that his supporters could call it. We really don't have either. As we sit here now, there's still a considerable amount left to be tabulated and up for grabs.
How far, Lanhee, do you think Donald Trump should go in court and beyond?
That's a tricky question because on the one hand, there is a well-honored tradition of both sides being able to lodge legal protests, and they generally don't affect things but on the margins. The problem is in this year's election, it looks like some of these margins are going to be pretty close. You know, what I think is going to happen is that both sides are going to exercise all of the legal remedies available to them. I think, unfortunately, what we're going to see from both sides is a tremendous amount of legal activity over, you know, the next several weeks, I have to say.
Lanhee, what did you make of the fact that earlier tonight, Vice President Biden came out there and he said, it's not up to me to call a winner, but I'm confident that we're going to be able to win this thing and we'll know it pretty soon. Is that Joe Biden, do you think, being genuinely confident about his path to victory, or is this sort of lessons of just project confidence and to an extent it can become self-fulfilling?
I think it serves two purposes. I think the first is to set the narrative. There's no question about it that the Biden team felt it was important to set that narrative that this election's a long way from being over. Even though it looks like the president might have an edge in some of these states, there's reason to believe that that vote count will change. Every vote should be counted, et cetera. That's narrative setting. But also it might be just to calm himself and calm his supporters, to remind them there is still a pathway. Whether he sincerely believes or knows that, my sense in talking to Democratic operatives tonight is they sincerely believe the vice president still has a very good chance at being elected president. But regardless of whether they believe it or not, getting out there, setting the narrative, reaffirming their supporters and themselves, I think was important for him to do.
Lanhee, what do you believe? Do you think Donald Trump has two of those upper Midwest states in him?
It looks very good for Donald Trump right now as I look at it. You know, I think he's got a number of different ways to get there. He doesn't need all three of those Midwestern states, so it would appear. And so, you know, you have to think he's got the inside track right now. I mean, just given what we're seeing in terms of raw vote count, we're being told there's a lot of vote left out there. But it's difficult to judge and gauge exactly what we're supposed to make of that. We know it probably goes for Biden. Does it go for Biden enough to wash out the margins that Trump has? And more broadly, I think the interesting thing about this election is we're actually seeing President Trump has improved his standing in certain parts of the country. We didn't expect that to be the case given the polling coming in. So I think regardless of where this goes from here, the Trump campaign and the Trump team have to feel very good about where they've gotten on election night.
Lanhee, the consensus among the polls, except for Trafalgar, was essentially saying this is more likely to be a landslide to Biden than a squeaker of a win to President Trump. So we are looking at the reality of another major polling miss, even though they were assuring us for the last couple of years, oh yeah, we fixed that thing with white non-college educated guys that was a problem last time. Is it your sense that this is maybe just a new problem or a different problem or the same problem?
I think it's a few problems. I think the first problem is not understanding the universe of voters who are actually going to vote. Every poll is an assumption, includes an assumption about who's actually going to turn up to vote. And if you don't have the right assumptions about the partisan composition of the electorate, you're going to end up with a bad poll result. And I think what we've seen so far, at least tonight in the election returns, is evidence that we've had a number of first-time voters who are actually supporting President Trump, suggesting there has been some alteration in the nature of the voter base. So that's the first problem. And the second problem is, yeah, I don't think pollsters are getting a straight answer oftentimes when they're asking people who they're supporting. And this notion of the shy Trump voter is real. I think that concept out there, with the exception of the Trafalgar Group, which had some polling that tried to account for this, a lot of people dismissed it. Maybe they shouldn't have, because I think they are capturing a dynamic here in terms of people who support Trump but maybe don't want to tell a pollster or don't frankly want to tell anyone about it.
What did you find surprising or interesting in today's count?
Well, I think it's going to be interesting for us to dissect what's happening with the Latino-Hispanic vote here in the U.S. There's evidence that President Trump was able to do very well with Latino voters in Florida, which enabled him to win the state. That is something, though, that dynamic looks very different in Arizona, where it appears as though he didn't do as well with Latino voters. And I think the answer may be that not all Latino voters are created the same.
Lanhee, is it late enough in the game to be able to assess the relative campaigns in as much as the Biden campaign's massive monetary advantage, the hundreds of millions of dollars they poured into states like Florida, including outside spending from Michael Bloomberg, tens of millions of dollars into Senate races where they basically seem to have done no better than they did, 6 years ago when they, put a nobody up.
Yeah, and the Democrats did worse this cycle with a lot more money on the Senate side than they did in 2018 when they did very, very well. Look, I think, if anything, it shows the value of traditional mobilization techniques, maybe something the Democrats did not do enough of because of the pandemic. We heard all along Republicans were doing the on-the-ground, get out the vote, knocking on doors, that political science research tells us works. Those kinds of voter contacts work to get out your voters. Democrats just didn't do that this year because of the pandemic, and I think it's going to cost them. The other thing that I think will cost them, frankly, was Biden's light schedule. The fact that Joe Biden, had a handful of campaign events compared to Trump, who was literally doing 4 or 5, by the end of the campaign, 6 events a day. Those events mobilize your voters, and if you're not doing them, you're not turning out your voters. And I think, in retrospect, the Biden team will see that as a huge error.
So, just to summarise, Lanhee, you seem to be saying to us that while this is still a bit of a toss of the coin, you think that coin is slightly more likely to come down on President Trump's side?
I do. I think at this point, President Trump has the inside track. If you look at where these various battleground states are falling right now, President Trump, is well positioned and well poised. Vice President Biden is not out of this by any means, but if you had to pick someone at this point, I would say President Trump has the advantage.
Lanhee Chen, always a great pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.
We'll be talking a lot tonight about the Electoral College, this strange and mysterious thing that decides who becomes President of the United States. Well, here are a few things you should probably know. First of all, the presidential candidate with the most votes doesn't necessarily win the election. That's because this election isn't a national one. It's effectively 50 state elections for president all at once. Each state votes for electors in the Electoral College. Those electoral votes are based on the size of the state's congressional delegation. Think of the Electoral College as a kind of a parliament that only has one job to do: to vote for the president and vice president. No matter how big or small, every one of America's 50 states has 2 senators, so that adds up to 100, and representatives are allocated by population, roughly up to 435 in total. And while Washington, D.C. isn't a state, it does get 3 electoral votes. So there are 538 electoral votes up for grabs, meaning you need 270 to win the presidency. Most states are winner takes all, but Maine and Nebraska split up their electoral votes. 2 go to the winner of the statewide popular vote, then 1 for the winner of each congressional district, 2 in Maine, 3 in Nebraska. Several states with smaller populations, though, end up with quite an advantage. The smallest state in America, Wyoming, has a population of just around 580,000, and it gets 3 electoral votes, 1 for each of their 2 senators and a third for their 1 House district. That's equivalent to 1 electoral college vote for every 193,000 residents. The biggest state in America, California, has a population of 39.5 million, and it gets 55 electoral votes. That's 1 electoral college vote for every 718,000 residents. That's why twice in 20 years, candidates who won California and the most votes nationally, Al Gore in 2000 and Hillary Clinton in 2016, still lost in the Electoral College vote and did not become president. And that's why Joe Biden may need to win the national popular vote by 4 or 5 percentage points to be confident of winning the Electoral College and the White House.
It's election night in America, in Australia, on planet America. I don't understand. Now, last week I said Democrats needed to win 2 out of these 3 states to win the Senate: North Carolina, Maine, and Iowa. And that was to get 50 Senate seats. Well, at this stage, they look like they're getting 0 of that 3. In fact, there's only one real possibility, and that is that they might win Susan Collins' seat in Maine. Now, I know that 6 points looks like a lot, which is what it is at the moment. I don't know if we updated that graph yet. But in Maine, they use ranked choice voting like Australia does. So it's all so complicated. So the Democrat, Sarah Gidgen, she just needs to keep Susan Collins under 50% to go to second preferences. Susan Collins is currently on 49.5%, so mission accomplished so far. Let's say Gidgen narrows things just a little bit more. The next preference down is Lisa Savage, who endorsed Sarah Gidgen and has won 4.3% of the vote so far. So if Gidgen takes a point or 2 off Collins, that 6-point race can become tied or better for the Democrats very fast. So let's say the Democrats did win Maine. Then look at North Carolina there, only 1.8 points down. You might recall that was the race where Democrat Cal Cunningham got a little bit frisky and sent out some naughty yet oh so lame text messages. And then he lost 2 to 3 points in the polls over the next few weeks. Imagine that cost the Democrats the Senate. Well, you might not have to imagine it. It may have just happened. But there were 2 other Senate seats as well. They were longer shots last week, so I didn't even mention them. Both are from Georgia. But they're the only seats left on the map, so let's talk about them. Now, in Georgia, if you don't win 50% of the vote, it goes to a runoff or a by-election in January. One of those seats, the Republican has 51% of the vote so far, so they may or may not stay above 50%. We will see. But in the other seat, no one is going to get over 50% for sure. So at least 1, possibly 2 seats are going to go to a runoff. And that means if the Dems win Maine, the extra election in early January will determine the Senate if Biden wins. So my question to you is it possible in this hypothetical scenario for the Democrats to get enough turnout in Georgia, which is until recently a pretty red state, when they're not getting people to vote against Donald Trump, which is half the reason they would have turned out this time? Is it possible for or is the Senate gone?
Well, look, we'll just have to wait and see whether that is a real shot in that special election or the potentially two special elections. Georgia is fascinating because of the campaign that Stacey Abrams, after her very narrow loss in the gubernatorial race 2 years ago, she made it her singular mission in life to flip Georgia to the Democrats. And they've done reasonably well today. It's still not being called. It's a reach for Democrats still. But they managed to get close, just as she got very, very close to winning the governor's race. So it's not inconceivable, given that they have that ground game there, they have the infrastructure and they have the volunteers, because one of the lessons today seems to have been the air war, the hundreds of millions of dollars thrown on TV advertising in Florida by not just Joe Biden, but also the Republicans against Trump, the Lincoln groups, Michael Bloomberg. All of this has come up zip, zally, zero. They have actually underperformed their polls by about 2.5 points, and Trump has extended his advantage in Florida. So as to what they can do on the ground in Georgia to maybe take back these Senate seats, that's going to be fascinating to see. Of course, they only need 50 Senate seats if they want to get the casting vote from the Vice President, who in this scenario, if the Democrats win, would be Kamala Harris. She'd be the 51st vote to break a tie. There is the question over Democrat in name only Joe Manchin in West Virginia in all of that. But look, we will just see. But there's also the optimist argument, which is actually one of the worst things Obama ever had was the luxury of 60 Senate votes in 2009 because he steamrolled over Mitch McConnell and the Republicans and passed the Affordable Care Act without bipartisan buy-in, and Republicans have been squawking about it for over a decade. This could force Joe Biden to play a hand he is good at, which is reaching across the aisle in the Senate. This could be the making of President Biden if he wins and if that happens to the Senate, but I could be wrong, Chaz.
Well, potential President Biden definitely does not have the problem of having too many seats.
Yes,
he's
avoided that embarrassment.
Yeah, I feel like whatever scenario eventuates, the Democrats, there are no good news scenarios from the Democrats from here. They really are pushing uphill because, as you said, the Joe Manchin scenario where he is the Democrat who determines what gets through, that would be a pretty wild ride in itself. But the real disaster scenario for the Democrats is if Trump can easily still be president. Don't get me wrong, but if Joe Biden becomes president and there's 49 seats to the Democrats, that means there's no judges being passed by Joe Biden. That means that we're going to go straight back to 2009 again, or 2010, when basically as soon as Barack Obama ticked down to 59 seats, it was, you're not passing anything, Jack. Yeah. And if Joe Biden takes over in the middle of a downturn and the American desperately needs a stimulus to keep it going, and the Republicans know if they just deny him that stimulus, Joe Biden has missed a recession for the next 4 years.
Yep.
There's a lot of incentive for them to capsize the country.
It's not just about doing new stuff, of course. It's about saving the old stuff. The aforementioned Affordable Care Act, if it's gutted by the Supreme Court in the next couple of weeks, and if a hypothetical President Biden is wanting to prop that up through legislative measures, that's going to be almost impossible if he hasn't got at least that 50th vote. But we'll just have to wait and see on that one as well. A tantalising possibility, Chaz.
It's indeedy. Now, Larry Sabato is coming up in the next hour. But first, that's a little teaser for you. First, there is one call. There's a lot of uncertainty at the moment, but there's one call I think we can definitely make right now.
It's been a hard-fought election campaign between two political heavyweights.
I profoundly accept this nomination.
This is your campaign.
But now, finally, we can announce the winner is uncertainty and potential pandemonium. In a dazzling come-from-behind victory, uncertainty and potential pandemonium enjoyed a late push in that critical final week. Voters, in the end, rejected Trump and Biden's policy proposals, opting instead for confusion, chaos, and change to something shit. And we could see even more ambitious initiatives coming to fruition, like mob violence, cannibalism, double pandemic, and Terminator, Rise of the Machines. Traditionally, winning candidates are inaugurated on January 20, but uncertainty and potential pandemonium can get started right away.
And you're going to have bedlam in our country?
Congratulations, uncertainty and potential pandemonium, whose only running mate is running mate.
Election 2020, 4 more years.
Maybe 4 more years of Planet America. We'll wait and see. This is Planet America's Election Night 2020 special. I'm John Barron.
And I am Chaz Licciardello.
It is still too close to call, of course, but that hasn't stopped President Trump calling it and Joe Biden saying he's confident he'll soon be able to call it too, Chaz.
Yes, indeed. Well, let's call a couple of things involving polling. Doesn't have a great ride. We'll talk about that a little bit more in a second. But exit polls, they don't really exist this year. They're a bit different because of the nature of COVID and all the mail-in votes. You couldn't have the normal polling people outside the booth. Well, they tried to, but they couldn't do very well.
And they also tried to poll people who also told pollsters they'd already voted early in person or they'd already voted by mail and everything else. But we knew it was going to be a bit of a schmozzle.
Yeah, so what the ABC has done, Fox News did as well, the AP, there's basically this 100,000 person survey, which was the vote cast, which is trying to take the place of the exit poll. It's not exactly the same as an exit poll. We should not call it an exit poll. But it is a poll of people who say they voted, or likely voters. And I'm going to compare that to the exit polls from back in 2016 to see if we can spot any kind of trends.
Right.
Okay. Now, we start off, women have gone from 13 points up for Democrats in 2016 to 12 points up for Democrats now. So actually, not much difference at all. For all the bluster about, the women that come out, well, at least according to this, they did not. Men, gone from 11 points down for Democrats to 4 points down for Democrats. So Biden actually clawed 7 points back amongst men. 18 to 29s, gone from 19 points up for Democrats in 2016 to 25 points up for Democrats. So the kiddies are like the super old guy, a little bit. Plus 65s, gone from 7 points down for Democrats in 2016 to 1 point down for Democrats. They thought they were going to do a lot better than that. There was talk of Democrats being 10 points up among seniors not too long ago.
Yeah.
That did not eventuate. So there you go. What about the fight for the suburbs? You heard a lot about that.
Yes.
Dems went from 4 points down in 2016 to 11 points up in 2020. So that was a big change. The Democrats did claw back on suburbs. What about white voters overall? That was what Joe Biden was supposed to help out with the white voters. Dems went from 20 points down in 2016 to 12 points down now. So a little bit there. Where did Biden do worse? He's doing better everywhere here. Let me tell you where. Hispanics, from 36 points up in 2016 to 30 points up today. So it's not tragic, but it's down. And we'll talk about them more in a few minutes. Finally, the black vote. We talked about them for the last 3 months, the black community. Democrats went from 81 points up to 82 points up. After all that fretting, all those talking points, the black vote stayed constant and went nowhere. But the Hispanic vote, not so much, John.
Yeah, fascinating to see how, as well, we were talking a number of times over the last few months about how it really is this sort of outdated concept to even think in terms of a Hispanic vote, because the priorities and the politics of Cuban Americans in Florida and Venezuelan Americans around Miami-Dade are very, very different to Mexican Americans in places like Arizona, Nevada, New Mexico and even Texas as well. And I think the Biden campaign got a very harsh lesson in the realities of that, and some of the messaging that the Trump campaign was using over and over again that was, I think, getting a few eye rolls amongst certainly progressive circles in the United States, that Joe Biden is a socialist because he was running for the nomination in the same party as a socialist in Bernie Sanders, and that the socialists are going to be running Joe Biden if he ever becomes. This argument that Biden equals Castro equals Nicolas Maduro in Venezuela, this really seems to have spooked a lot of particularly older Cuban Americans in Florida.
And also, I'll add to that, Colombian Americans and Venezuelan Americans, who there are plenty of in Florida as well, and they're not big fans of socialism either. They get a little bit nervous about that kind of thing. Also, actually, I'll just throw one more thing in there, because I was going to talk about this later on, but we might talk about it now.
Why not?
That it's not just geographically based Hispanics either. There's other changes. Like, for instance, Trump in 2016 also exceeded Romney's results amongst Protestant Latinos. Now, we don't have the results on that yet for this election, but I bet he continued that move. also amongst poor Latinos who, if you recall, quite like Bernie Sanders.
Yes.
Against Joe Biden.
Yeah.
So that might have bit. And finally, he's done very well in the past, we'll see if he did well today, amongst third-generation Latinos who, I've said this 1,000 times on the show, they consider themselves white. Democrats consider them people of colour. They do not, and they respond in every way like white people, just like I do. I'm a third-generation Italian. I can do nothing but swear in Italian. I've lost it completely. Yeah. And I think the Democrats would do well to remember that.
And to Trump's credit as well, for a long time I thought that he was not making a big issue of border security on the southern border because it failed at the midterms in 2018 when he was talking about the caravans coming. It backfired completely on him. And I thought, well, given that he'd only actually built 27 kilometres of new wall in 4 years, that's probably the reason why he's no longer saying build that wall. And yet it seems there may have been a much smarter call on this. Don't alienate the Mexican Americans, other Latinos, and he has won back, particularly amongst the younger males, he's won back a group of them by going a bit easy on immigration, unlike 2016. So there are lots of tea leaves there to read.
And I should say, by the way, he didn't do too badly amongst the Mexican Latinos in Arizona either. The reason the Democrats won Arizona was not because of the Mexican Latinos.
Yeah, fascinating. We are seeing some pretty tectonic shifts in voter allegiances, and Trump has really been in many ways the instigator of some of these big changes. We don't yet know whether they're going to outlive Donald Trump. But certainly race was on the ballot in the United States today, literally in the sense that Kamala Harris was running to be the first African-American woman to become either president or vice president, first woman potentially to become vice president. It was Carol Moseley Braun that was actually the first African-American woman to be elected to the United States Senate. Kamala Harris was only the second. Senator Moseley Braun is backing Joe Biden this year, and she joined us a bit earlier from Chicago, Illinois. Carol Moseley Braun, welcome back to Planet America.
Thank you. Happy to be with you.
And Senator, what difference do you think a President Joe Biden would make to America?
Huge. It'll make a difference to the world, not just to the United States, but to the world. He will take control of this government and begin to do some things that we frankly should have been doing all along. One is getting control, getting some kind of a handle on this pandemic. I mean, which has kind of been left to just kind of run rampant. But I think that President Biden will get a handle on the pandemic in a way that will allow us to not only address the problem, but to help fix it.
Senator, it seems that Republicans and Democrats have cared more about courting the black community than any election that I can remember. Why do you think that is?
Well, because the black vote can determine the outcome, because it's a specific vote that can go either way. And if it goes in favor of Democrats, then Democrats win. In fact, I worked with Joe Biden for 6 years. And one of the first speeches I remember him making was to the Democratic caucus, in which he said he was one of the few members of the caucus that wins the black male vote in his state.
Now, I've seen some polls where the demographic that's most resistant to a black female vice president is actually black men. Do you think that sexism is still a problem in the black community?
Well, it's a problem universally. I mean, frankly, look at the result. Look at what happened to Hillary Clinton in the last election. She did not win the male vote either. And so misogyny plays a role along with racism.
Senator, in your view, what would be the impact on America of 4 more years of Donald Trump?
Well, in addition to a huge exodus of people out of the United States, Australia and New Zealand may have to look out, because there'll be a lot of people looking to immigrate to those countries. But I think 4 more years really would be a problem for this country. It will give us, frankly, a country I won't recognize. And again, I don't mean to be partisan here, but it really is a matter of good versus evil as far as I'm concerned. And it's a matter of how can we keep our country headed in the direction of reconciliation, of bringing people together, of solving some of our racial issues and problems, and how we move forward. And whether it's environmental issues or retooling the economy, you name the issue, and it really is on the bubble with this election, which is why everybody's on pins and needles, because you don't know until the last electoral college vote is counted how it comes out.
Now, Sandra, in the last month or so, we've seen a number of economic statistics come out from 2019 suggesting that under the first 3 years of the Trump administration, the black community has done particularly well when it comes to higher incomes and escaping poverty. Does that make you reevaluate the Trump administration at all?
No. I'll tell you why, because it's not just the economy. It is about the soul of the nation. I mean, Joe Biden talks about reclaiming the soul of America, and he's right. It's not just a matter of dollars and cents. It's how do you grapple with 225,000 dead Americans who are dead for no good reason, because this pandemic has been so mishandled.
And finally, what do you see as the next step, both for the black community and for greater society's relationship with the black community?
Well, let me say this. The last generation was able to achieve social integration. What they did not achieve was economic integration. And so that is what that's what our generation is dealing with now. And particularly the young people, they just won't have it anymore, where they wind up just being just consumers only and don't have an ownership interest or a stake in the American economy, in the American dream.
Senator Carol Moseley Brown, thank you very much indeed for your time.
My pleasure.
Now, before we move on, Chaz, we should have a little bit of a look at what's been going on in Florida.
Yes, we should, but even before that,
You got breaking news?
Breaking news.
Breaking news.
Michigan's now up to 80% counted, 4.5% margin.
To who?
To Trump. Trump over Biden.
Okay, so that's closed.
It's closed up. It's closed up just a little bit more. It's closed from. Okay, through my notes.
It's closed up a little bit more.
It's closed up a little bit more.
The other thing we should say, of course, on a lot of these counts as well, these are estimates as to how much is potentially outstanding. These percentages of the vote counted, because the election officials are not saying how many votes there are to count. In some cases, they're still counting them, so they do not know how many is there.
That's right.
So these are pretty rough, and so therefore don't assume that if there's only 5% left to count, that you won't see quite a swing within that 5%.
That's right. It closed from 4.9% margin to 4.5% margin. Okay, so Florida.
Yeah, now, so the polls were saying, the average of polls, there are a few different averages of polls, but the weighted average of polls from 538 was putting Joe Biden's lead in Florida this morning at 2.5% for the 29 electoral college votes, a state that Trump won by 1.2% 4 years ago. Obama won Florida twice, and we know that it's often been a bellwether. It's often gone with the winner. In fact, it's gone for a winner every year since, except for 1992. So that's a good sign for Trump today. He ended up blowing those poll expectations out of the water. Trump winning today by 3.5%. That's the biggest fail from the polls so far, isn't it?
Definitely so far. That's the equivalent of Wisconsin back in 2016. They've done it again. We'll talk about the polls a little bit later on. But my question is, let's stop kicking the polls just for a moment to kick Joe Biden. Why do we think this happened? Because they invested a lot of money. Michael Bloomberg invested $100 million, and then Biden invested a lot of money as well. We at the time, this is not hindsight, we at the time talked a lot about the ground game and about the fact that Trump had 44 field officers in Florida and Biden had 0. And we were told about the telemarketing and the teleconferencing and all the rest of it. In the last 3 weeks of the election, they started doing some door knocking. Not in Florida, though. They did it in the Rust Belt and in New Hampshire. So I can tell you right now that even 3 days ago, they could see they were in a bit of trouble because Democrats, anonymous Democrats, are already saying, would it be nice to get some money for some door knocking? They were already clearing their throat, trying to point fingers then. Do you think that's what's going on? Well,
as you say, I mean, hindsight is 20/20. It now appears completely obvious and predictable that Mike Bloomberg's tactics that got him nowhere in the Democratic primary got Joe Biden nowhere in Florida in November. It just goes to show you that you can't fake enthusiasm, and that even though President Trump faced a lot of criticism for holding these super spreader event campaign rallies, one study said 700 people have died as a result of Trump rallies. He didn't care about that. He kept holding these rallies. He also moved, of course. He became a Florida resident. He's at Mar-a-Lago all the time. He's a cheerleader for Florida. If President Trump loses this election after his result in Florida, he should probably run for governor there or run Don Jr. for governor in Florida next.
Well, it's interesting because Ron DeSantis, who is
mini-me Trump.
He's a bit mini-Trump, exactly. He's not exactly kicking goals in Florida as far as approval goes. He's underwater in Florida. His disapproval's higher than his approval. So that didn't help Trump at all, but he still took it away.
Yeah. Well, I guess we're going to see the analysis, and unfortunately it's only usually in the weeks after an election when the recriminations kick in that people actually start saying, yeah, I was warning them all this time. But clearly that lack of a ground game from the Democrats, whether it was the right thing to do in a pandemic or not, it seems as though by Donald Trump kind of taking those risks and allowing others to take risks on his behalf, it has paid off in certain parts, and Democrats are going to be very, very dirty if they end up losing the Rust Belt as well because they didn't go knocking on doors. Now, coming up a little bit later in the program, Chaz, we have a very special guest, Bob Woodward of the Washington Post. First, though, we're going to hear from Sam Nunberg, who was an advisor to the 2016 Trump campaign. Sam joined us a little bit earlier on from New York City. Sam Nunberg, welcome back to Planet America. Good to see you there.
Thanks for having me again. Great to be on.
A smile on your face, Sam. Is that a smile of happiness, relief, or just uncertainty?
Well, I'm a man. I love chaos. We're about to see something we have never seen in modern politics. You're looking at. We're not going to know we're not going to know who won this election at earliest by the end of this week, I believe.
What has surprised you most about today, Sam?
Well, nothing has surprised me. I was expecting the president to win Florida. I was expecting him to win Ohio. What has surprised me right now from the results that are currently in is I want to explain this. This is very important. The president is winning counties in that Rust Belt, that crucial Rust Belt of Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Minnesota. He's winning counties that he did not win last time. He's taking a lead in Pennsylvania. There's something going on. It was something late and breaking. And what it was is I would say it's synonymous with what happened with the Boris Johnson race. In other words, there was something on the undercurrent that the elites and the mainstream media just didn't see and couldn't understand. In this country specifically, what the president ultimately started running against was shutdowns, running for an economic recovery, and Biden played prevent defense way too long. But I had been saying for weeks, what exactly was Biden's message? I don't like Donald Trump. People are getting COVID and I'll hug you. Like his ads were absolutely terrible.
So Sam, you seem to have basically suggested Pennsylvania is one of the states that Trump will win. What's the other one? Because if Biden's got Arizona, he needs one more. Do you think it's Michigan, or do you think it could be Wisconsin or Minnesota?
I would probably say Michigan. And it's funny because there was a longtime congressman named Congressman Dingell. He died, and his wife took his seat. She's a Democrat. But she had said something, and she had been warning. And what she had said was, I do not know one rank-and-file voter, one rank-and-file auto worker, one rank-and-file plant worker, not the leadership of the unions, the rank-and-file who was voting for Joe Biden. They are all voting for Donald Trump. It doesn't matter if they're white, they're black, they're yellow, they're green, or they're orange. They were all voting for him.
Do you think if Trump wins Michigan, he'll do it purely on the vote, or do you think it's going to be the vote plus court cases?
The issue is going to be, what is the amount that the president is up by after tonight? What will the exact amount be? So, they could say there are X amount of outstanding ballots, but let's be honest here. If the president has a 500,000 vote lead, he has a 250,000 vote lead. That means that even if there's 600,000 ballots, it doesn't mean Joe Biden's going to win all those. Look, if Donald Trump ends up losing this election, if he ends up not winning Pennsylvania or Michigan or Pennsylvania and Wisconsin, he'll be the first person in probably the history, I would say, in the history of the United States to win both Florida and Ohio. The probability of him not being president, not getting re-election is a quarter.
Sam, it's always a great pleasure to talk to you. Thanks for your time.
It's an honor.
You're watching Planet America's live election night special. I'm John Barron.
I'm Chaz Licciardello.
If you're just joining us, the result of the US presidential election hangs in the balance this evening. Joe Biden appears to have the likelier path to victory. He's leading in the popular vote and he's leading in the electoral college vote as well. But Trump has significantly outperformed his polls again, deja vu 2016, and there is a lot of uncertainty. And frankly, Chaz, these guys aren't helping anything.
It's not my place or Donald Trump's place to declare who's won this election. That's the decision of the American people. But I'm optimistic about this outcome.
This is a fraud on the American public. This is an embarrassment to our country. We were getting ready to win this election. Frankly, we did win this election. We did win this election.
Oh, don't look now, Chaz. We've got breaking news. Oh. Breaking news. What is it?
I moved the sting. By the way, before I tell you the breaking news, are we going to have to put up with those horns forever with Joe Biden every time he talks? It's like a footy grand final afterwards. Anyway, breaking news.
Yes.
Pennsylvania is in on the game as well. The last time we checked in on Pennsylvania, they had 74% counted and there was a 12.7% margin. That's a big margin, John. 1% more has been counted, 75%. Now it's an 11.5% margin, which is still a big margin.
In 1%.
But it's 1.2% down.
Okay, well, which again rather supports the argument that Celinda Lake was making in the last hour, that they feel as though they have banked enough of these early postal and in-person votes to get over the top in the Rust Belt.
They do, but remember what I said about 7 counties that supported Trump last election hadn't started counting their mail-in votes.
Yeah, well, look, coming up shortly, we're going to speak to Never Trump Republican Senator Jeff Flake. But first, let's get some reaction from one of the icons of American political science, Dr. Larry Sabato of the Center for Politics at the University of Virginia. Larry, what is the story so far? What can we say at this point?
This is a nail biter. It really is. There are some very close states that will determine the presidential election, but there are also big chunks of vote that are out. In most cases, it's early votes. You'd think that would help Biden, but in some cases it hasn't. So this is very much up in the air. I think nobody would be foolish enough to call it, but I can guarantee you some fools will.
I'm definitely not going to ask you to call it, Larry. All it seems we know for sure so far is that Florida, one of the most overpolled states in the country, gave us a dramatically different result to what the polls suggested yet again in an election.
Yes.
Do you have any idea what went on in Florida?
I am so glad I'm not a pollster because there are so many people on both sides that are coming to get them. I hope they're ready, but they had 4 years to correct their problems. They had 4 years. Anybody can screw up once, as in 2016. But to do it again and with the same candidate, Donald Trump, and a lot of the same conditions, really, it's inexcusable. And they'll come up with 15 reasons why it happened, and I'm going to turn the TV off at the third reason.
Larry, a lot of Democrats who expected to do better in some of those states like Florida and Georgia and even Texas is still that Democrat pipe dream, are now quite nervous about the Rust Belt. How long could it be before, if this stays close, how long could it be before we know?
Well, we're going to know at various points. That is, we'll have a count at some point, and then the lawsuits will start. And then the courts will rule, and then somebody will appeal the court decision. And, you know, I don't know. I know it has to be resolved one way or the other by January 20th. And I hope it will be resolved, you know, much earlier than that. We have the meeting of the Electoral College in mid-December. So, you know, the time is limited, and one just can't say at this point because we don't know how close it really is.
I know it's too early for hindsight because there's all kinds of outcomes that might take place from here. But are you at a point where you could confidently say that either Biden or Trump made a particular mistake in their campaign?
Oh, I think you'd have to list mistakes on both sides. These were not the best campaigns I've ever seen. You know, for one thing, Donald Trump as an incumbent president was even more difficult than he was as a challenging candidate in 2016. And on the campaign trail, rather than driving home his message, he would talk about his grievances and attack this one and attack that one. And that's not what you do when you're the incumbent president of the United States. Now, if he wins, everybody will say, oh, that was great. But actually, January 1st, before the pandemic started, he was substantially favored to win a second term. Now he's fighting for every vote. It's pretty clear already that Biden will win the popular vote probably by more than Hillary Clinton did. Donald Trump, if he wins, and that's by no means certain, but if he wins, he'll be the first president in American history never to have won the popular vote while serving 2 terms. We are such a divided country. This doesn't help.
Larry Sabato, we so appreciate your time once again. Thank you.
It was fun. Thank you.
And I've got breaking news!
What? What's the breaking news? What's the breaking news?
There's no more results, but I just want to let you know I forgot my shirt in that last interview. That's an embarrassing content. Sorry about that.
I'm personally glad that you are not wearing the same T-shirt all day. We've been at this for about 12 or 13 hours already. Now, look, even though many Republicans tried to stop Donald Trump becoming their candidate 4 years ago, since then, most of them have fallen into line behind their president, but not all of them. Former Arizona Republican Senator Jeff Flake was one of Trump's most vocal internal critics until he retired last year for exactly that reason. Jeff Flake spoke to us earlier from his home in Arizona, which has now been won by Joe Biden. Well, first of all, Senator Jeff Flake, welcome back to the program.
It's great to be here.
Since we last spoke to you, since we last spoke to you at the start of this year, you've come out and endorsed Joe Biden, a Democrat, for president. Why did you, a lifelong Republican, do that?
Well, as a conservative, I felt that the future for Republicans under President Trump just isn't good. Future for conservatism under President Trump is not good. Anger and resentment are not a governing philosophy, and soon enough it runs its course. We've got to appeal to a broader electorate, not just kind of drill down more on our base, and that's what the president has done. So I just don't think that there's any future with Trumpism.
If we head now into a period of 2 or 3 weeks of accusations, lawsuits, recriminations, and grievance, regardless of who comes out on top at the end of that, how does America come back together? Well,
I can't control what the president does, and he is likely to challenge, the results if he loses. He's said that. But I wouldn't expect any of the institutions of government that matter to go along with him if he hasn't won a genuine election. I think Americans are being conditioned to wait a while. I'm hopeful that the country is prepared for it. But I can tell you, if the president is expecting my former colleagues in the Senate or the House or the courts or the military or any institutions of government to back him up, if he hasn't won a genuine election, he's mistaken. They won't.
That's a very interesting comment, Senator. So you think this could be the moment when we see the Conservative establishment really breaking with President Trump if they feel as though he's trying to do something nefarious?
Yes. And I just think that there's a bridge too far for the president to try to claim that he's won an election when he hasn't. So, I mean, he could win. We still don't know. He could win a genuine election, but people are going to wait for the votes to be counted.
Senator, you've said that you support Joe Biden for the presidency, but hope that Republicans can retain majority control of the Senate. That seems to be effectively saying that you want Donald Trump to be defeated, Joe Biden to be a president who can't get anything done.
I'm a conservative. Gridlock is usually a wonderful thing. So I like my government slow and boring. I mean, so yes, divided government is usually the best government. And if you look at the big challenges that we have to face, our looming debt and deficit, for example, dealing with climate change or immigration issues, those issues are only going to be solved when the parties come together. And it's unlikely that if one party controls the presidency and both chambers, that party will move ahead on any of these issues. They just won't assume the political risk involved. It has to be both parties kind of holding hands and jumping together.
Finally, Senator, let's just say when all the votes are counted, turns out the polls were wrong again, and Donald Trump has surprised us all with another election victory. What are the implications of that in your mind?
Well, for the party, I'm very concerned about what another 4 years will get us. And if we continue to see the decimation of the party down ballot, lost the House, likely lose the Senate, and in state legislatures as well, where redistricting will happen in the next 2 years. Who draws those lines? If we have bigger majorities on the Democratic side drawing those lines, that will favor the Democrats even further. So I don't think it's a good picture in terms of the world and our trustworthiness and reliability as a strategic partner and a trade partner. That's been in question, and I think the world is just kind of waiting us out, hoping that the old America will reemerge. If it's another 4 years, that'll be very difficult. What could have been seen as an aberration would be seen as a trend, and that's very troubling.
Jeff Flake, a pleasure to talk to you again. Thanks for your time.
You bet. Great to talk to you again.
Who would have thought that Arizona is now more left-wing than Florida?
Pretty extraordinary, isn't it?
Yeah, 2020 is full of surprises. And nothing is more surprising than the fact that we have an exclusive interview with President Trump himself.
This is huge.
Yeah, Mr. President, how are you feeling?
Woo! You know, it was never in doubt, folks. It was never in doubt. No doubt. Yeah, I wasn't worried for 1 second, not even 0.01 of a second. Not worried at all, and I feel absolutely fantastic. So let's get started, all right? We're going to be locking up the Bidens, folks, all of them, all the Bidens. You know what they say, when you get to prison, go up to the biggest Biden and say, why are you locked up? And they'll tell you it was me. It was me. We're going to lock everybody up. Hillary, the Bidens, Nancy Pelosi, and then we're going to throw away the key. I'm going to lock up the debate moderators. Bob Woodward, he's out planning America. They'll be locked up. Anthony Green, him too. Chuck him in there, right in the cage.
Okay, now look. Good old Johnny. We spoke to Lanhee Chen earlier about polling. He talked about the big black eye that the pollsters have gotten. And look, we shouldn't go too early on this, because if you recall in 2018, the day of the election, it looked, oh, wow, this is really close. Yeah. The polls are all wrong. And then, yeah, exactly. In the end, the Democrats won by like 9 points, because after California, they had its votes and votes. California, by the way, takes 17 days.
Yeah.
To take in more ballots. Yeah. So there's a long lag time there. So this may change a lot. But I think it's fair to say, look, right now the popular vote so far is Biden by 1.3%. It's going to move a lot to get to 8 points, which is where the 538 average was at the beginning of the day. It might get there.
Yep.
What won't get there is Michigan with an 8-point margin, even if Biden ends up winning Michigan, which he may well, the way this is going, but 8-point margin, unlikely.
Yeah.
Wisconsin, 8-point margin, unlikely. Florida, we've already talked about that, 6 points off. What is going on? Now, they're going to talk about COVID, undoubtedly, about the fact you can't determine the sample size properly if you don't know who's going to vote, you don't know who's turning up, who's scared, whatever. Mail-in ballots, how many are being disregarded, and how many disqualified. They're going to talk about that kind of stuff. But still, how many elections in a row, presidential elections, can this happen before we've got a real problem?
Well, of course, the same thing can happen for different reasons.
Yes.
i.e. the polls can be wrong
Totally.
this time for a different reason to in 2016. You look at Florida. I mean, that is undoubtedly a big miss. Biden was in front. Interestingly, Biden was only just in front in the poll average from Real Clear Politics, which had a lot of those Trafalgar polls, Rasmussen polls, the pro-Trump polls, the shy Trump voter polls. They were mixed in there. So even they were tending to get it wrong. I mean, this is actually a better performance for Trump than even the sort of bullish on Trump polls. So this is not just a one pollster v another pollster issue.
It is, but Trafalgar were a lot closer than the non-Trafalgar pollsters were.
But if they've got a House effect of +3 or 4 for Republicans, that is just automatically in there for them. Well, that's great, but it doesn't mean the rest of their polling is any better. It just means that they're tacking that on. And if you look at some of the other polls, they were fine within the margin of error. Arizona, the polls had Joe Biden winning by 2.6%. Well, he's won it. We don't yet know what's going to happen in the Rust Belt until those final votes are counted. But you're right, it looks as though there may be a 3% polling miss, which can be a big deal in a close state, obviously, a very big deal, but again, within the margin of error. So that's where the pollsters will always have that little bit of an escape clause. They'll say margin of error, even in the average of polls, margin of error.
Absolutely. And yeah, I'm not jumping off the bandwagon of polling in general, but I just feel like we're getting to a point where the Trafalgar kind of polling has proven itself enough times where people should at least run alternative polls, which is a more conventional form of poll and one which is a more, just for those who don't know what we're talking about, Trafalgar is a polling company that what they say is they ask, they're very cagey about exactly what they ask, but essentially it's stuff like, who do you think your neighbours might vote for? And you don't know who your neighbours are going to vote for, but their theory is that a lot of people don't want to talk to pollsters, and if they do, they don't want to tell them the truth. And they're more likely to tell them the truth if you distance the person from the information they're giving. That's their suggestion.
It's a bit like saying, do you watch MSNBC or Fox News? And saying you watch Fox News, you're more likely to be a Republican voter or you're conservative as a result of those choices or those answers that you make. Rather than pinning people when they're going to, because of social pressure, they feel as though they can't say that they're a Trump supporter, which may well have happened in Florida, given, if you think of all that money that we're talked about being spent in Florida, if people are seeing all these negative ads about Trump, maybe it's the negative ads that are helping to inflame the shy Trump voter, particularly in gated communities, retirement villages, when everyone's in each other's business. You can imagine why there would be some shy Trump voters there.
Absolutely. And by the way, when I talk about running two different polls, some companies do that. I think it's LA Times with the University of Southern California. They run both a conventional poll and a Trafalgar-style poll, and their Trafalgar-style poll was more accurate.
Yeah.
But anyway, another miss was looking through the votecast. They asked people their most important issue to them, and these were the numbers. You had COVID was 42% leading, and Democrats led by 52 points amongst the people who said COVID was their most important issue. Not a surprise there. Economy was 27%. Republicans led by 61 points amongst that group. Then daylight, 9% was healthcare. Democrats were ahead by 38 points amongst them. 8% was racism. Democrats were ahead by 63 points amongst them. Law enforcement was 4% was next. Republicans were ahead 59 points amongst them. So for those counting the numbers, 42 plus 9 plus 8, that's 59%, the most important issue, were Democrats dominating compared to 31% were Republicans dominating. Now, there were more issues after that, obviously, but that doesn't really add up. If you look, and also I remember Harry Anton was talking about the fact that in the history of polling, when an issue is the most important issue to voters that isn't the economy, it determines the election every time.
Except maybe this time.
Maybe this time.
Although as you yourself have pointed out, Chaz, it is impossible to separate out COVID and the economy. These two are interrelated and inescapable. You can't fix one without fixing the other.
And I should also say there's two sides to every one of these. Like you might say the reason why COVID is my most important issue is because I think it's a hoax. There are all kinds of reasons.
Exactly.
I don't want to go too hard. I'm just saying that I feel like I wouldn't want to be a pollster right now. It seems to be incredibly difficult.
If nothing else, that does prove yet again that we have two quite separate, conflicting information ecosystems in the United States. If you're a Democrat, you're worried about COVID, not so much the economy, shut it down if we need to save lives. If you're a Republican, you're saying, we need to take some risk with lives because we need to get this economy and people's livelihoods back up and running. And they've got just such a different worldview in one country, which they're yet to reconcile on so many fronts. But we did speak to two experts about both of these issues. The pandemic with Dr. Maggie Nolan. She's in a COVID hotspot right now there in Wisconsin. And we also talked about the state of the economy right now with Professor Betsy Stevenson in Michigan. Take a look.
Well, unfortunately, we are breaking our state records. We have 241,000 cases so far, 2,100 deaths. We've been averaging the last week or so, 5,000 new cases a day. The result is our hospital capacity at about 85%. 87% of our ICU beds are full. This is really troubling, especially as we go into the winter. There's things about this surge that are very different. First, this surge, at least in Wisconsin, is bigger. Second, in the United States, if 42 states are seeing surges, even if they aren't as large as Wisconsin, mobilizing resources, personnel, we can't bus in people from surrounding states in the Midwest because they're all fighting their own battle. And this is going to be a problem with therapeutics, with all sorts of resources, just because of the number of states seeing surge.
The U.S. economy is in pretty difficult straits right now. It depends on whether you're a glass half full or a glass half empty kind of person, though, how you see it. In fact, I guess I should have said 2/3 full or 1/3 empty, because we've recovered about 2/3 of the decline we saw at the very beginning stages of the pandemic. But that means we've got 1/3 to go. And to put that in perspective, our GDP today is about 3% smaller than it was a year ago. And we've got almost 23 million people still receiving unemployment insurance. So a lot of people out of work, a big hole in GDP. And frankly, I think we've done the easy part. I think for me, one of the most disturbing things we've seen is a massive decline in women's labor force participation, as moms have just found it to be way too much to manage taking care of kids at home and trying to work from home or try to find a job. We've never seen such a big, rapid decline in women, particularly in that sort of middle age. If you compare it to September 11th, it took a really long time to get people back on planes again after September 11th. I think it's going to take a really long time to get people back on planes again after the pandemic. It took a really long time after September 11th to get people to want to work in high-rise buildings again. I think we could see the same kind of problem with the pandemic. And in both those cases, I think the problem's probably worse and longer lasting.
Now, Chaz, I want to get a bit of an update from the state of Georgia. This is one where Democrats have had high hopes of maybe picking it up. Joe Biden was leading by around 1 point in the average of polls from 5 to 38. And this is a state that has not been won by a Democrat. It used to be solidly a part of the solid South for Democrats back in Jimmy Carter's day when he was governor. Bill Clinton won it in 92, but it's gone Republican ever since. What is it looking at right now?
They haven't recounted, they haven't started restarted counting, but it's 92% counted so far, 2.2% margin with Trump ahead of Biden.
Yeah, but some big districts around Atlanta that have a large African-American population and a large Democratic vote expected to be amongst that. So it's a lot of ground to make up, but still not impossible. The Reverend James Woodall is the Georgia State President of the NAACP. He's a Democrat, intelligence analyst in the US Army Reserve and a Baptist minister to boot. We spoke with Reverend Woodall from Atlanta about his view of how the president's play for the black male vote in particular has been playing out.
I really don't believe Trump has had much of an impact that he nor pollsters say he has. I'm a black man and I know black men, and majority of them are not voting for Trump. They're not voting for an agenda that is only focused on the 1%. They're not voting for people who are more committed to their proximity to power and privilege than it is the welfare of the people. And so the black men that I organize with and I talk to and I worship with and I work with and serve with in the United States Army, I know that they're more concerned about their communities. They're more concerned about their families. And some of them may vote for Trump. Maybe they do vote for Trump. But what I do know is that their motivation is not him as it relates, but it's more important to really talk about the issues about healthcare and the environment and those kind of things. And I personally, both as the state president and as an individual citizen, I know all too well the record that this administration has, and it's piss poor. And so as a black man, it is unacceptable to continue to push a narrative that suggests that black men somehow are going to come out in droves in a historic turnout for Donald Trump. That's simply just not going to happen, and I will not stand for that either.
Now, of course, the nightmare scenario, Chaz, after tonight was one of disputed ballots, lawsuits, recounts, maybe protests as well, and an election result ultimately decided by the courts. And it's certainly looking as though that could be exactly where we're heading. And, of course, it has happened before, just 20 years ago.
Election Day, the day to choose a new president for a new century.
The 2000 presidential election had been unpredictable. Democratic Vice President Al Gore lagged behind Republican Texas Governor George W. Bush for most of the campaign. But then came what passed for an October surprise in those days. News that Bush had once been pulled over for drink driving in the 1970s.
Years ago, I made some mistakes. I occasionally drank too much, and I did on that night.
The polls tightened. On election night, TV networks started calling crucial swing states for Al Gore.
But I think, Bill, and you're the maven on this one, that generally networks do not call unless they have a pretty high degree of assurance, correct?
That is correct. We have a pretty high degree of assurance that Florida and Pennsylvania have gone for Al Gore.
But not so fast.
Stand by. CNN right now is moving our earlier declaration of Florida back to the too close to call column.
Then, 4 hours later...
George Bush is the president-elect of the United States. He has won the state of Florida, according to our projections. 25 electoral votes. NBC News projects that George Bush, it's been a night of first giving it to Al Gore, then taking it away on the part of the networks.
Gore called Bush to concede, but as the counting in Florida got closer, again, Gore called Bush back and retracted the concession. The next morning, the result was still unclear because a lot of the ballots were unclear.
Vote-o-matic machines and conflicting rules about ballots and fuzzy rules about what is a vote.
It's slightly detached.
Democrats charge a confusing ballot layout led voters to think they were punching the ballot for Al Gore when they were actually voting for Reform Party candidate Pat Buchanan.
When the counting finished, Al Gore had won the national popular vote by over 500,000, but Bush led in Florida by 1,784 votes total. Florida law required a machine recount. That reduced Bush's lead to just 327 votes, but those counting machines couldn't read the presidential preference on 170,000 ballots. 60,000 of them were what's called an undervote, where the voter hadn't clearly punched through the box, leaving a hanging chad or a dimpled chad. The other 110,000 were overvotes, where the voter may have punched for Bush or Gore cleanly, but wrote in their name as well. Court cases flew thick and fast. Gore demanded a partial hand recount in counties he expected to do well in. Lawyers for Bush and Gore fought over those chads and the postmarks on mail-in ballots as well. As the deadline to certify the results loomed, the Florida Supreme Court ordered a statewide hand recount. Then, 4 days later, the US Supreme Court stepped in.
Get it in your mind, first of all, the Supreme Court of the United States has reversed the orders of the Florida Supreme Court on a very narrow majority, 5 justices to 4.
It was over. George W. Bush was 537 votes in front, and that became his winning margin, not just for Florida, but the presidency as well, claiming the Electoral College with 271 to 266 for Al Gore. It wasn't until over a year later that a University of Chicago study announced that had all 170,000 undervotes and overvotes been counted, Gore would have won by between 60 and 171 votes. It was still so close, but by then America had been attacked on 9/11 and had launched a war to oust the Taliban from Afghanistan, a war which continues today.
Planet America, fake Oval Office, fake news, fake host. Who are these guys?
And fake Donald Trump as well, Johnny DiDomenico. Now, Chaz, one of the things about Florida 2000, I think, that is instructive for us to think about tonight is the way in which it is already informing the reaction that we've seen from both President Trump and Vice President Biden. We saw Joe Biden come out saying that he's confident once all the votes have been counted, he will win this election, but he's not going to call it. That's up to the election officials to do it. Then President Trump, of course, came out immediately and said that he thinks that there's fraud going on and this is being stolen, etc. So we have no concession of defeat. We have claims of victory from both sides, which is the opposite, of course, of what happened in 2000 when Al Gore made the potentially fatal error of conceding defeat and then calling Bush back and then retracting that concession, because from that moment on, it set that narrative that Al Gore had actually lost, and then he was a sore loser, and he was the one trying to steal it in the courts, where, as we saw there, ultimately the experts found out that Al Gore had more votes in Florida and would have won had there been that full hand recount, which incidentally Gore never requested. He got a bit greedy. He just wanted a hand recount in the states, in the counties in Florida that he thought he was going to do best in. So in the end, he lost by 537 votes. So we could be seeing history repeating, and the court cases are already getting warmed up.
Now, I haven't given our control room notice of this, but I do have breaking news.
You've got breaking news?
Yeah, let's see how long it takes them to kick off the sting.
Let's see if they've got breaking news. I think they need more notice.
Yeah, sorry about that. Look, Michigan, there's a few more results that have come in. The last time we talked about Michigan, they were 80% counted, and there was a 4.4% margin. This is pretty minuscule breaking news. It's kind of bent news.
Yeah.
They're now... So the answer is it takes 25 seconds. Now 81% is counted, and there's a 4.3% margin. So just a little bit.
Yeah.
There we
really
go.
worth it. Now, tell me about the kind of cases that you're expecting, because we've already had we've literally already had a number of significant cases decided by the Supreme Court and also federally and also state Supreme Courts that are affecting the various states' abilities to keep counting right now.
Absolutely, and this is what some of these lawsuits are going to be about, Part 2 and Part 3 of these cases. All three of the key states we're talking about, Wisconsin, Michigan and Pennsylvania, have been to court over the issue of whether they are going to accept ballots that were mailed before Election Day but arrived after Election Day. Okay, so they're postmarked. There's no doubt there's no doubt whatsoever they were sent before Election Day, but they arrived afterwards. Do you count them or not? Some states do count them. Pennsylvania counts them for 3 days.
Yep.
Wisconsin and Michigan both tried, and through court, they were taken to court over it, and they lost. But that doesn't mean that Democrats aren't going to try again through a higher court. So that's one form of lawsuit we can probably expect if the Democrats are on the losing side of some of these tussles. But Pennsylvania is lawsuit central. There are so many. Okay, first of all, I just told you that they're accepting them for 3 days afterwards. Now, some Republican counties are actually just stashing away all the ballots that arrive after Election Day and not even counting them. They're going, well, we're going to go to court, so we're not going to bother counting them.
Right.
When the court makes us, then we'll count them.
Yep.
So they're already starting with that. If Trump loses Pennsylvania, they are definitely going to appeal that ruling. Right, they'll go to Supreme Court on that one for sure. But there's other issues as well. Just very quickly, I'm not going to go into too much detail. I just want you to realise what's going on. It's not just 3 days. That's the issue with Pennsylvania. Another issue is, remember how I told you that these ballots are clearly postmarked? Not in Pennsylvania, they're not necessarily. Their system at the moment, after various court actions, says that if it's not postmarked, it can still be counted.
Yeah, right.
And the Trump team are saying, hang on, this is ridiculous. You could see the margin the day after. No, you're not, because it hasn't been counted yet. And you could then just send through then whatever you need. And if it arrives the day after, you say, oh, yeah, I sent it beforehand. It's just not postmarked. Now you might go, how's it not going to be postmarked? It just so happens that election mail is often not postmarked.
Because it's first-class mail.
Yes, and first-class mail is not postmarked. Yep. And so as a result of that, post offices have been trying to postmark them just in case, but they don't always succeed.
Yeah, right.
And so that's another issue. And another issue with Pennsylvania is even though they're supposed to signature match, they've decided just for COVID, if their signatures don't match, they'll accept it anyway.
Really?
As long as you have your driver's license number or a social security number. Once again, the Trump team are going, hang on. If you can't sign your name, you can't accept that. once again, if Trump loses Pennsylvania, that is going straight to court.
I don't think I've done 2 matching signatures in 20 years. You do it so infrequently these days. But there's also that
There's
thing.
one more.
What about the double envelope?
Yes, this is going the other way. If the Democrats just lose, this is their court case, which is in Pennsylvania, they have a rule where, yes, there's, as you say, double envelopes. There's an envelope inside an envelope. And if you don't put the ballot inside the envelope that goes inside the other envelope, so it's just a ballot inside an envelope, if you do that, disqualified. They tried to get rid of that rule, but they lost. Right. And so now the Democrats are clearly going to challenge that.
So the 2 envelopes is the outer envelope has the identifying material on it. The inner envelope is it's like we get sometimes with AEC votes for workplace agreements in this country. Yes. You get the little one inside which is anonymous. Yes. And so it's therefore separate.
Exactly. Look, there's a reason for it, but the fact is both sides have, I think, quite reasonable sounding court cases if they want, and I think they're going to want. So
you're right.
That's what we can look forward to.
Yeah.
And this is going to happen, by the way, before December 14. December 14 is when the Constitution says that this whole thing needs to be over.
Yes.
One of the reasons why Bush versus Gore occurred when it did was because they were trying to short-circuit the process because they were getting near December 14.
Exactly.
So that's the red line.
Everybody's pretty relaxed about the legal process until the clock starts ticking, and as they found in 2000, after 36 days, suddenly people said, OK, let's bring the hammer down and call an end to all of this. We've got a very special guest for you coming up in the next half hour. Veteran American journalist Bob Woodward will be our guest. He, of course, had a total of 18 interviews this year with President Trump over 9 hours, some of them in the middle of the night when the president picked up the phone and said, Bob, I want to talk about this and that.
We won't talk to him that much.
No, we won't talk to him that much, but it's going to be pretty interesting as well. So Bob Woodward's coming up for you soon. You are watching Planet America's Election Night Special. I'm John Barron.
And I'm Chaz Licciardello, and I have real breaking news.
Do we have a sting?
We've got a sting. We've got a sting.
No, we don't.
No, we don't. Who cares? We don't need a sting.
What is that?
Yes, we do. Of course we got a sting. Okay. Last I talked to you guys in Michigan, 80% were counted, 81% was counted, and there was a 4.3% margin.
Yep. Trump was leading by 4.3.
That's right. Yes. Now, the 83% has been counted in Michigan, so 2% more.
Yep.
And Donald Trump has a 1.3% margin.
So his margin is shrinking more than 1% for every percent that is being counted. So again, vindicating the confidence that we've been hearing from the Biden supporters that Michigan is looking good, Wisconsin is looking good, but Pennsylvania may not be so good.
Still 11-point margin in Pennsylvania.
Yeah, well, very interesting to see. All right then. Well, on the east coast of the United States, people are waking up now to an unresolved and hotly disputed election. They've got a president claiming fraud without evidence and a challenger who says that he thinks that he will have the votes to win, assuming that those votes are all counted, Chaz. The BBC's North America correspondent Nick Bryant has set the alarmies up for us early in the morning in New York. Nick Bryant, lovely to see you there, mate. We've been talking a bit about Florida 2000 in the last 10 minutes or so. You must be getting a sense of deja vu 20 years on.
Oh my goodness, I'm a veteran of the Florida recount. I remember coming off air that night and my boss, who was a Kiwi, said, mate, can you get on a plane to Florida? And 36 days later, we found out the result. And as Chaz was saying, the Supreme Court intervened just before that deadline where the Constitution says you have to have a result. And what they said was you could keep on voting. And what they said in the next sentence was, but you got about half an hour to do it. So the election came to an end. George W. Bush was given Florida in a 5-4 ruling. And what was interesting about that ruling was that the Supreme Court justices, the 5 who decided it went along ideological lines. 5 conservatives went for shutting down the recount. 4 went for keeping it going, including the famous Ruth Bader Ginsburg. They basically said this ruling should be limited to these circumstances. They did not want it to be a precedent. Legal scholars believe that was because they were so shamefaced about the ruling, which was seen as a sort of constitutional smash and grab by those 5 conservative justices. And tellingly, they did not put their names to that ruling again, which underscores this sense that they were pretty shamefaced about what they did. Now, we are in that kind of territory. Anybody hoping for a clear-cut victory, as you have been telling people all night, it hasn't happened. I was with the Biden camp. In fact, I'm in Wilmington. I'm not in New York. I was with the Biden camp. I spoke to one of Joe Biden's most senior advisors just as the polls were closing. They were so confident of victory. I was astonished at how openly confident they were. They were describing scenarios where they were going to drive through North Carolina. They were going to drive through Georgia. They didn't think they were going to win Florida, but they thought they stood a chance of Texas. They were going to take the scenic route to the White House. And of course, it's ended up being this white knuckle ride where we don't know what the outcome's going to be.
Now, Nick, we spoke to Democratic pollster Celinda Lake earlier on, and she was saying, look, this is all taken care of. We know what we're doing. It's all, we've got this all worked out. Did you get the sense when you were hanging around these people that they feel like they've lost? Even if they haven't lost the actual election, it just feels like a loss to them because it's so close?
Oh, it's really interesting. I mean, I was with Hillary Clinton's team 4 years ago. I was in the Jacob Javits Center where that glass ceiling in that massive convention center was supposed to be figuratively shattered. The mood was different 4 years ago. They were celebrating already. And then you had this kind of weird thing where all the people who told you that Hillary Clinton was going to, smash it and, win elections suddenly disappeared. They were nowhere to be seen. We didn't have that quite last night, but clearly the Biden camp were being far more circumspect as those results started coming in. I mean, like I say, they didn't expect to win Florida. They knew that Florida was a toss-up. But, Florida's often indicative. They were kind of worried about the Hispanic vote around Miami-Dade. They were worried that that sort of traditional Democratic vote bank wasn't coming in. Then the early signs in Georgia weren't particularly good. They believe still in Georgia there's Democratic votes in the suburbs of Atlanta that haven't been counted yet. Their assessment changed. And what they had been describing was a Biden blowout. And clearly they're not going to get it. And again, given the false prophecies of 4 years ago, given the overconfidence of the Hillary Clinton campaign, given the fact that before Election Day, they didn't campaign much in some of the key states that ended up deciding that election, including Wisconsin, I was astonished that they were being so brazenly and flagrantly confident. But we ended the night, I've only had about 1 hour's sleep. They still think they can win, but obviously the route is not the one they wanted to take. It's a narrow path.
Yeah, Nick, I mean, is this a Trump-specific phenomenon, the fact that this guy seems to be defying not just the conventional wisdom, but the laws of gravity? He does everything that you are told not to do as a candidate, as a president. He gets outspent massively in a state like Florida, not just by Biden, but by the Lincoln Project, by Michael Bloomberg throwing hundreds of millions of dollars at it. And Trump ends up extending his margin in Florida for one of the biggest wins in that state we've seen in quite some time. This is quite remarkable, and it's got to be about more than just the polls are a bit dud. It's the ads are a bit dud and the campaigns are a bit dud. Everything's dud when it comes to trying to beat Donald Trump.
Well, look, a crucial point, and I'm sure you've been making it through the night, is that Donald Trump got more votes in 2020 nationwide, not just in Florida, nationwide, than he did in 2016. And that should bury, once and for all, this false idea that Donald Trump's victory in 2016 was a historical accident. I've written this book saying in 2016 it was almost historically inescapable. We should not have regarded Donald Trump's victory back then as an aberration. And this result, however it turns out, just proves that. Donald Trump is loved and adored by much of America. There is a near cult-like devotion by much of his base. They have looked at the fine print of the Trump presidency. They have seen the tweets. They've heard some of the outrageous things he said over the past 4 years. But again, they have clicked on the terms and conditions. And Donald Trump is an extraordinary force in American politics. And America is as deeply divided as it has ever been. This idea that this election would be some kind of panacea, that Biden would win clearly, and it would be some kind of repudiation of Donald Trump. however this turns out, that has not happened.
Now, of course, we should qualify that Joe Biden may well win. He might be the favourite to win at this point in time. But I wonder, we look at Donald Trump, and as you say, there are times when it looks like he's trying to lose. He does things just so unorthodox, and he's actively repelling women, female voters. We've been saying this all along. Yet the result is the result. And I wonder whether Donald Trump is proving, at the very least, that his method of appealing to the base and not reaching across the aisle, not being like a president used to be, actually works. I mean, if he did exactly the same thing, reaching across the base, but didn't repel people unnecessarily, surely he'd win comfortably.
Look, he's a deliberately divisive figure. He has fought a 30-state strategy since he became president. The 30 states that he won in 2016. It's almost like he's tried to build a Trumpian wall around the states that he won in 2016, rather than try and expand the base. I mean, that's the conventional wisdom. If he was going to lose, it was because he didn't expand the base. He didn't try and woo back some of those suburban women who voted for him 4 years ago, holding their noses, prepared to give him a chance, but really didn't like what they'd seen and experienced buyer's remorse, voters' remorse very quickly. And of course, the rationale for Joe Biden was that he was the kind of decent and civil guy that could bring in those supporters. But, maxing out the base and trying to suppress the turnout of the other team is the way that the Republican Party has been grinding out electoral victories for some time now, as you know. I mean, in the last 7 elections, they've lost the popular vote 6 times. George W. Bush is the only president to have won the popular vote as a Republican in 2004 against John Kerry. So, the Republicans have got good at grinding out victories in the Electoral College, and maybe, Donald Trump has proven that he can do that again. But like you say, we don't know the result yet. We don't know what will happen. But what we do know is that Donald Trump is far more popular than conventional wisdom thought he was.
We also know, of course, Nick, that Donald Trump is already saying that this election has been tainted by fraud. They're trying to steal this election. He wants to stop votes that come in after the close of polls from being counted. He immediately was talking about the US Supreme Court, not state Supreme Courts in Pennsylvania, Michigan or Wisconsin. He's talking about the US Supreme Court. If this, like 2000 Bush v. Gore, if Trump v. Biden goes to the US Supreme Court, and a court that many Democrats believe he has stacked with conservatives through nefarious means after the filibuster on Merrick Garland, what do you fear could happen to the United States in that kind of potentially explosive environment? Because there were protests that turned violent in 2000, and that was, in retrospect, a much more sedate time.
Yeah, in 2000, there was something called the Brooks Brothers riot. Brooks Brothers is a clothing chain. It's a kind of posh clothing chain where businessmen buy their clothes. And it was a kind of chino-clad militia that tried to storm where the votes were being counted to shut down the recount. And actually, they succeeded in doing it. But it was an unarmed militia. It was a chino-clad militia. And of course, the worry this time is that the militias actually have guns, and they have been a presence in this election. I mean, I was in Michigan a few weeks ago. There was a rally against Governor Whitmer. It was just a few days before she was taken, a few days before the FBI unveiled that plot to kidnap her. And it was so frightening to see so many people. It's an open carry state. So many people were carrying AR-15s. And of course, that's the worry. And I mean, on the eve of Election Day, I mean, what brought it home for me was the street I live in New York, the shops were being boarded up. The fear of civil unrest that we've obviously seen earlier in the summer because of the response to the death of George Floyd. But, we could see that in so many places around the country. And that is the fear that this election could be decided in the courts, and other people will want to try and decide it in the streets.
Okay. Well, Nick Bryant, always a very great pleasure to talk to you. Thank you very much for taking the time there in Wilmington, Delaware. My pleasure. You guys know your American politics. I mean, you know you're on.
Thanks, Nick.
You know what's
We'll let you go. That's the BBC's North America correspondent, Nick Bryant, joining us. Well, speaking of journalists, slightly more veteran than our good friend Nick, Washington Post reporter Bob Woodward has been, well, literally one of the most famous reporters anywhere in the world for almost half a century now. His reporting on the Watergate scandal with Carl Bernstein ended the presidency of Richard Nixon. Bob Woodward has now covered 9 presidents in his career, including, of course, Donald Trump. And his assessment of President Trump, while typical to Bob Woodward is pretty low-key, is also pretty damning. Take a look. Let's talk a bit about the history as it will be written, do you think, in your mind? Whether it's his Washington Post obituary someday or how history is going to recall Donald Trump as president.
Well, one of the things I asked him in early interview is, what's the job of the president of the United States? Kind of, it sounds like a simple question. And he said right off the bat, to protect the people. And I think in his obituary, it's going to say, the late President Donald Trump failed in his responsibility to protect the people of the United States from the coronavirus. He failed to tell the truth. And quite frankly, I think historians are going to be quoted saying that there was a moral failure to understand his responsibility, not just to his political base and Republicans, but everyone in the country. I think it will be a severe judgment.
I wonder, Bob, what have you made of President Trump's behaviour on the campaign trail in the month between his own COVID diagnosis and hospitalisation, and then, as soon as he possibly could, getting back out there to these mass rallies in swing states, fighting hard to try and win this election? What's been revealed of him?
Well, it reveals a determination to be reelected. There's no question about that. I talked to him about this before, well before he got the virus, and he told me, he said he thought in 2016, in his first run for the presidency, that he won barely by a squeaker, but he won. Said he thought he won it in the last week. And in the last week in 2016, he did 24 of these rallies. He gets energy from this. He does draw massive crowds. It shows a lot of support. I think the Trump voter is committed, and there's very private polling showing that these voters who support him would crawl through glass to get to the polls to vote or to mail in their ballot. Biden supporters don't have that kind of depth of personal commitment.
Bob, when all these votes are finally counted, and if it's shown that Donald Trump has in fact lost this election, how do you expect him to respond in the days and weeks and even a couple of months ahead?
Easier to describe the creation of the universe, to be honest with you. I have no idea what's going to happen. How, he said in a very brazen way, well, he's not sure he will accept the conclusion of this. He's not sure there will be a peaceful transfer of power if he loses. I genuinely think we could have chaos. Whether he wins or loses, under the American Constitution, he's going to be in office for all of November, all of December, and most of January. That's a long time to be president and to work this out. So I think a serious social convulsion will follow at some point all of this. And our political system here is going to be tested to see if they can deal with it, whether it's Trump reelected or Biden, the new president.
If it is, Bob, that we're seeing Joe Biden raising his hand next January 20th and Donald Trump's going off into private life, Do you expect him to stay on the political scene? Could he do a Grover Cleveland and come back in 4 years, or will he just go and play golf and enjoy his money?
Well, I don't think he would come back after 4 years of Biden. But again, you know, back in 2016, people thought he couldn't win. As you know, there was all this polling. Well, as the polling experts have said in this country, polling is broken. You don't really know what you're measuring. I think people in this country are wearing a seatbelt, and they're also wearing over-the-shoulder harness, and I think they're wearing a crash helmet.
We appreciate you and your work, including your latest book, Rage. A pleasure to talk to you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Now, we still don't know whether Trump or Biden is going to win this election, but the show goes on, and preparations for the possibility that Trump might lose have already commenced. And I've got to say, they're looking fascinating.
From the people who brought you Trump versus Biden comes one more must-watch clash. It's Trump versus the Secret Service member who has to wrestle him out of the White House.
He wants to bring me to the back of the barn. Oh.
We will have so much winning.
But I don't want to fight an old man.
It's the Fight House. For one night only.
I'm the most militaristic person ever. Knock the crap out of him.
He's going to what? Didn't he just nearly die?
Trump's got nothing to lose, and he's going down swinging.
I'd like to punch him in the face, I'll tell you.
Where will I have to grab him on his body?
Trump's last stand. Live on pay-per-view.
Can't I just leave treats on the ground and Hansel and Gretel him out of there?
Election 2020. You're going to miss me. You're going to miss me.
Well, Chaz, here we are, and we thought at this time of the night we would probably have a result. For a while, it looked as though a Biden landslide was more likely than a narrow Trump victory. Well, now we know there is no landslide either way, and we could see a narrow or reasonably comfortable Biden victory, depending on how the states play out, or a narrow Trump victory is not impossible as well. 238 to Biden, 213 to Donald Trump, 270 to win. And then, of course, there's a question of the Senate and the House of Representatives as well. Democrats had hoped to pick up some Senate seats and to pick up some House seats, but it's maybe not panning out so well.
Yeah, it hasn't been a great day for them in the House either, I have to say. I mean, there's still lots of House seats being counted, so there's no point giving you projections. I'll just be making them up, essentially. But at least at this point in time, Republicans have flipped 4 more seats than Democrats have. So they've made some ground back.
Yeah, and of course we've talked about how the 2018 midterm elections, the blue wave that was anticipated there, which on election night itself looked as though it hadn't eventuated, and then of course they found out as all those votes came in that they were able to swing over 40 seats. It was actually a very big midterm win for the Democrats that year. Doesn't look like it's happening this year. In the Senate, of course, Democrats are immediately going to say, hey, don't despair about the fact that we spent $50 million not to beat Mitch McConnell in Kentucky. In 2 years from now, we have another third of the Senate coming up for re-election, a more favourable third in many ways to the Democrats as well. So if we are looking at a President Biden who is unable to get that 50th vote in this Senate, they're immediately going to be raising money, sending out the emails, looking to do what they possibly can, hopefully in a post-COVID environment, to be winning that Senate to get some sort of legislative agenda passed.
But that's true, but it will be hard for them to win seats in the midterm if they've just spent the last 2 years in a recession doing absolutely nothing. People always blame the president for that. Yeah. And by the way, if the House becomes a little bit closer yet, that puts the House within striking range of Republicans in the midterm.
You're right that more often than not, about 2 times out of 3, the incumbent president does suffer midterm losses on their first 2 years in. But there's also the give 'em hell Harry example of 1948 and the fact that Harry Truman was able to run very successfully against Congress. In that case, he was seeking re-election for himself. But it is possible for a president to do that. So we'll just wait and see, because certainly partisanship being what it is, and also the anger, if for some reason Democrats don't win the White House and don't win the Senate this time, the anger, well, Is it going to translate into anger? Is it going to translate into disillusionment? Or is it going to translate into a firmer belief that we went for an echo, not a choice in Biden. We went for another old white moderate, not that Trump's necessarily moderate, but another old white guy. We actually needed somebody else, somebody younger, somebody exciting, or somebody, like Bernie Sanders or whoever it may have been.
I suspect the Sanders fans might have something to say about what has happened. One more thing, which we haven't mentioned, which we'll probably talk about on Friday, it's a bit more nerdy, is governors and state legislatures, which are also important because they've just had the census. Next year, they're going to redraw the districts that determine who wins the House. So with all the gerrymandering and all the rest of it, the people who are in charge of states determine those lines. So we'll be talking all about that on Friday.
Yeah, it's going to be fascinating to see. We don't even know what the topics for discussion are going to be by that point. It could all be over, of course. Something extraordinary could happen, or it could be that we're looking down a month or more of legal challenges up until the certification of these results. Now, there are obviously lots and lots of questions that you're probably still thinking about as to what's happening in this US election. The ABC would like to hear from you. If you have questions, you can go to abc.net.au/US election. You can always contact Chaz and I via Twitter as well. We might have some time on the fireside chat to take some more of your questions. That's been fun recently. But that is all the time we have for this very special live edition of Planet America Tonight, Chaz.
Like we said, we are going to be back on Friday for a fireside chat on the news channel at 8 p.m. That's where you'll find us. And for Planet America at our regular time next Wednesday, not 2 hours.
No.
Back to half an hour.
That was fun. We could do 2 hours next week.
Oh,
okay.
maybe.
All right. Good night for now. Bye.